everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm very excited because this is the first video I'm filming with my camera and I am so pumped. So, today we're going to be talking about the books I read in May. There were some good ones. This was a really good reading month for me. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. So, the first book that I read in the month of May was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. This is an amazing book. I love it. So basically, you follow Huckleberry Finn, who's this young boy in Mississippi during the abolitionist movement, Civil War era type time, and his adventures with an escaped slave named Jim. I love this book because it's a really good combination of fun and adventure and humor, and also of serious topics and commentary on like the racial issues of the time. So, you know, like, cause Huck Finn, he's a young white boy, and he has been taught his entire life that black people are less than him, that they are not the same as white people, and then he forms this really close bond, this close friendship with this man named Jim, and you get to see his internal struggle of, okay, you know, what I've been taught is black people are bad, but I'm learning that they're not. And he truly has love in his heart for his friend, and so you get to see kind of his internal struggle of like, wait, does this mean that what I've been taught is wrong? What do I do? And so I really like that. I like that you can kind of see the internal struggle, and it's a deeper book than just like, I mean, because it is like a fun adventure book, but you also have kind of those deeper themes, and I think that that's really cool. This book has been banned for its use of the N-word, and I disagree with that. I think, because, I mean, it's banned because they say it's racist, because it uses the N-word. But I think if you really look at the message of the book, it's that black people deserve to be treated well and that slavery shouldn't exist. That's like the whole point of the book. So I think calling it racist is pretty out of touch and is coming from somebody who hasn't read the book. So, I mean, it is kind of hard to read the N-word so many times, especially because, you know, it is a slur, but I think it's important to remember the context of the book, and that the book is about being kind to other races and not being racist. Another thing is that it's also kind of difficult to understand sometimes because it's written in like the Southern dialect and the like African American vernacular English of the time. So not only do you have kind of the 1800s speak that we don't use anymore, but you also have it with an accent. And so sometimes it's a little difficult to like understand what each character is saying, but once you get into it and get into a flow, then it makes more sense and you can understand. I really recommend this book. It's a great summer read. It's super fun. There's so much adventure and it's really funny too. And I don't know, I just think it's a great book. So yeah. The next book that I read was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Also 5 out of 5. I love this book. This book is probably one of my favorite books of all time, dare I say, because it is so good. So basically, it's about this young orphaned girl named Anne, and she's adopted by a brother and a sister, and it's just like her adventures of like being with a new family and going to school for the first time and learning these manners and learning how to be like a woman in society and stuff like that. And I just love her. She's such a sweet character, and I think one of the reasons I like Anne so much is because she reminds me a lot of how I was when I was younger, because she talks a ton, and you can ask anybody who knows me because I'm still like this, but when I was younger, even like I would talk so much that my mom said that I would just sit there and talk and talk and talk to her, and then I would notice her getting tired, and then I'd be like, oh Mom, do you need a break? And she'd be like, yeah honey, I need a break for a minute. So I'd be quiet for a few minutes and then I'd start talking again. And that's how Anne is. And so she's just very lovable, and she has just like this beautiful imagination, and she's obsessed with nature and imagining things about nature, and I just think that that's such a fun thing. And the descriptions of the nature in this book are absolutely beautiful. L.M. Montgomery is an amazing writer. This takes place in Prince Edward Island, Canada, and it's just gorgeous. Like, you can picture it so clearly because of how well she writes it. So yeah, I really love this book. I also love the character development. You get to see Anne grow up and mature and learn new things, and I just think that that's really special. It's also a pretty easy read. I think that if you are wanting to get into classics but you're a little nervous about the language, this is a great place to start because the language is very accessible. It's not like, it is a classic and it was written a long time ago, but it's not super hard to understand, and it's also not super long. And I think that it's technically qualifies as a children's book. So it's pretty easy to read. And it's just great. So yeah, I recommend this to everyone. It's also a really great summer read. I read this sitting outside, listening to the birds chirping and in the sunshine, and it was just beautiful. So yeah. The next book that I read is Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy this. It was an interesting read for me. So basically, it's about this man named Wallace who's died, and he's taken by a reaper to a ferryman, and he does not want to cross to the next part of life. And so it's kind of about his journey accepting that he's dead and stuff like that. I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, same author, and I really enjoyed it, so I thought I'd give this one a shot too. And it was pretty enjoyable. I think the story is really interesting, and I enjoy seeing other people's perspectives on something like the afterlife. I am very religious. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I have a very strong testimony in what I believe will happen to me when I die, but I think it's always worth it to hear about other people's beliefs and hear another perspective. I think that's always something that you can learn from. My Siri went off. Go away. I think that's always something that you can learn from. So I was interested to read this, and something that I think is really interesting about this book is that it approached the afterlife without any religious aspect, which is how most people think about the afterlife, is in the framework of religion. So I think that was really interesting to have it without religion. I don't know. It was an interesting perspective. I think that T.J. Klune's a great writer. I love his writing style. There's a lot of like magical realism in this book and in The House in the Cerulean Sea, and I really enjoyed that style. It's fun to read about. The reason that I gave this 3.5 and not higher is because a large chunk of the middle of the book was just kind of boring to me. It felt like the same thing over and over again, like the same day happening again and again, and I was like, hey, get on with it. What's happening? Because there wasn't a ton of character development happening. It was just kind of monotonous. So that's why I kind of knocked it down, is because I was just a little bored. Also, I think the ending should have gone in a different direction, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. I won't spoil it. But if you've read this book, let me know what you thought about the ending. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about this is that I think the romance it felt a little forced to me, and it also seemed pretty predictable. Like, there wasn't a lot of build-up to it. It was just kind of like, here it is. And to me, it felt like the only reason that the characters got together is because they were gay, and to have it be like a diversity character and have that be the only reason, because there wasn't a lot of character development around their relationship with each other, or like, I don't know, the main character Wallace, like, you wouldn't know that, I think he's bisexual, but Like, you wouldn't know anything about that until, like, all of a sudden he's, like, they're in a relationship. And so I think that there just should have been more character development that way, because it just felt like it was only thrown in there to have diversity, and that was the only reason. So I don't know, I just felt like that could have been incorporated better, and that the character development could have been a little stronger for us to see why they got together and why, you know, they ended up falling for each other, because it just didn't make a ton of sense to me. But overall, I think it was a really fun read, and it was very wholesome, which I enjoyed. And after all the next books I'm going to talk about were kind of dark, and so I'm like, I'm needing some more wholesome books again. So I appreciated that this one was wholesome, and if you have any like wholesome book recommendations, let me know. The next book I read was Contagion by Erin Bowman. 3.5, no, sorry, 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5 stars is what I gave this. I'm just gonna read the synopsis of this because I think it'll make more sense. So the synopsis says, "It got in us. After receiving an urgent SOS from a work detail on a distant planet, a skeleton crew is dispatched to perform a standard search and rescue mission. Most are dead, but when the crew arrives, they find an abandoned site littered with rotten food, discarded weapons, and dead bodies. Don't set foot here again. As they try to piece together who or what could have decimated an entire operation, they discover that some things are best left buried and some monsters are only too ready to awaken." So basically it's about a rescue crew who goes to this planet and then discovers there's been some type of disease, contagion, if you will, that's spread, and they're trying to figure out like what happened, and they're also trying to like survive. So yeah, I think this book was like pretty okay. It was a solid 3 stars for me, like right in the middle of the pack. Not amazing, not terrible, pretty okay is how I would describe it. It was like mostly fast-paced. A lot of the reviews I read said they were like so terrified by it, but I was like not that scared. I also tend to kind of skim through things though, so that could be why. I think maybe if I read it more like word by word, it would have scared me more, but I think it was that bad. The plot was pretty good, but the characters were kind of dumb. Like, it's like that classic horror movie stereotype where the characters do stuff and you're like, why are you doing that? You're an idiot. You're about to die. That's kind of how this whole book was for me. Like, I didn't understand the reasoning. I was like, can you give us some more reasoning as to why you're making these decisions? Because they're not good ones. And one thing that I really didn't like about this is that it's a multiple POV book, which I don't mind multiple POVs, but they changed, the POV changed like paragraph to paragraph. So there wasn't any labeling as to like who was talking. It just changed whose point of view you were seeing from all of a sudden. And so there were a few times that I was like, wait, who's talking right now? Who is thinking? And so it was a little bit hard to follow every once in a while. But the more you got into it, the more I like was like, okay, you know, I understand who's talking. But it was definitely a little weird to me. Oh yeah, one thing to note is that this book ends in a huge cliffhanger. I thought it was a standalone. Turns out my library just didn't have the second one. So yeah, just so you know, like if you're gonna read this, just know it ends on a cliffhanger. I enjoyed this book, but not enough that I would read it again, and not enough that I'm like concerned about reading the second one. I don't really care necessarily what happens enough to read a whole nother book about it, if that makes sense. But I think if you're looking for a quick read, you enjoy thriller, you enjoy sci-fi, it's a good book. It's pretty good. Okay, next book. These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I gave this 5 out of 5. So this book is like a very loose retelling of Romeo and Juliet, and it's set in 1920s in Shanghai, China. Fun, right? I loved it. So this book is really popular on TikTok, and listen, I've read some popular TikTok books and I hated them. They sucked. I was like, how did this get any amount of hype? Awful writing, terrible plotline, whatever. But that that was not the case with this one. I was worried. I was worried going into this. I was like, this will either be great or it will suck. But it was great. I think that Chloe Gong did a fantastic job of making the story her own and the characters her own, while also kind of giving you that like nostalgia of, oh, it's Romeo and Juliet at the same time. And it's very captivating, and there's a mystery aspect to this book that I wasn't expecting, and I really enjoyed it. I think she did a great job. Because I wanted to know what happened. I was like, what is going on? How are they gonna solve this problem and figure out this mystery, you know? Sorry. So yeah, I was hooked for the most part. There were a few parts that I was like a little bit bored, but not enough for me to put the book down. Like, I read it basically in one sitting. So yeah, and this book also ends on a cliffhanger, but I'm definitely gonna read the second one because this was really, really well written, and I think it's just so unique and so fun. I really think the author did a fantastic job of making this unique. Yeah, I think it's worth all the hype that it gets. And I really like that the title is like a quote from Romeo and Juliet, because I think the title, These Violent Delights, really fits in with the story that the author created, but then it also like ties you back to Romeo and Juliet, and I just enjoyed that. Like, what a great choice of title, right? Overall, fantastic read, 5 out of 5, definitely recommend this one. The next book that I read is called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I gave this 4 out of 5. This book is really good and really confusing. So basically it's about a man who has to solve the murder of this woman, Evelyn Hardcastle, and if he doesn't solve it by the end of the day, then like the day starts again and he has to relive it until he can solve her murder. And this book is very long. This book is like 700 pages long, but you need every single page to understand what's going on because it's really confusing sometimes. And I'm gonna be honest, I almost gave up on this book. I was really close to, I told my husband even, I was like, should I keep reading this? I'm 100 pages into this 700 page book and I'm bored and I'm confused. Like, I don't know what's going on. And he's like, I don't know, you know, you could keep reading it, but is it worth the time? So I went back and forth, but I was like, okay, I'll read a little bit more of this, but we'll see. And I'm glad I stuck with it because it really picked up like right after like the point where I was that I was gonna stop reading it. So, and I read it again, like in one sitting, and it did give me a migraine, but I think that's because I read it on my phone and it was like 700 pages long and I read it in one sitting. But yeah, take that as you will. Yeah, I think this is a book you shouldn't know a ton about before reading, so I'm not gonna say too much more, but I think it's really fun and I think it's worth the time that it takes to read it because it's really captivating and the mystery is really good. The last book that I read was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, I'm gonna guess? Michaelides, I think. I should have looked up how to say that. 3.5 out of 5 stars is what I rated this. This is another very popular book on TikTok, and I think it was pretty good. So basically, this woman, there's someone in the hallway, I can hear. This woman is tried and convicted of murdering her husband, and since the day that they found her, like standing over his body, she has not spoken a word. And it's been 6 years now. So 6 years of her not saying anything at all to anyone. And this therapist is like, I'm not like the other girls, I can get her to talk. And so he goes to the mental hospital that she's living in. Hold on, I gotta get a sip of water. I'm out of breath. So he goes to this mental hospital and applies, and they hire him to work there. And he's like, I'm gonna get her to talk. So yeah, that's what it's about. I enjoyed reading this book for the most part, but there were huge chunks of it that I was like, why are we talking about this? It is unnecessary, doesn't fit into the plot, and it's boring. So that's kind of why I docked some points, because I was like, why? But there's a huge twist at the end. I'm not gonna spoil it, don't worry. But I did not see that twist coming at all. Like, at all. It really took me by surprise. I was sitting there and I was just like, mouth open. My husband's like, are you good? I'm like, yeah. Let me finish reading this. Like, hold on. Give me a second. But yeah, I did not see it coming. And I was also definitely like spooked by the end of it. So that was also a pretty good sign. Yeah, the main reason I docked points is a bit because of the boring parts, but also because there was like inclusion of Greek myths, and I feel like it was kind of forced, and that the characters were like very two-dimensional, and some of them were just there for like the stereotype of being there. And like, for instance, the therapist guy who's like, I'm gonna get her to talk, his boss is like this Greek man, and so he like randomly talks about Greek myths all the time. And I think the author is also Greek by, his last name. But I'm like, all Greek people don't go around talking about Greek myths, obsessed with Greek myths all the time. Like, that's not a thing, right? Pretty sure that like all Greek people aren't like, oh yes, this random Greek myth, I know everything about it and I'm gonna give you insight as to what it means, you know? I don't know, it felt, there should have been more character development. If you're gonna include a character, put in character development, please. But overall, I think it was a pretty good book. And I'm glad that I finally read it. Just a note, there are some dark topics in this book. It's about a murder, so there's that one, that's the big one. But there's also like sexual assault and family trauma and just some stuff like that. So I think, just so you know, if that's something that's going to be harmful to you, skip this book, because it is talked about and it is heavy in certain parts of it. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, I think overall it was a good book. I'm glad that I finally read it, because I had seen it a while ago, like last year, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, and I finally read it. So yeah, that was all of the books that I read this month. It was a good reading month for me. I read a lot more than I have the past couple of months, so I'm glad that I was able to read more. Yeah, I'm looking forward to June. I don't have a June TBR this time to be read, because I have been kind of mood reading, and I'm kind of bad at making TBRs, to be honest. And do you remember how in the last video I was like, I'm gonna read Don Quixote this month, and if I don't, it's gonna be embarrassing? Guess who didn't read it? This guy. I started reading it, but I had read a bunch of classics in a row, and I was like, okay, I need to just read something else for a while. So when I'm in the mood for that, I will come back to it, but I don't want to just force myself to read it. I want to actually enjoy it. And I own that one, so I can come back to it at any time. But yeah, that is kind of embarrassing. Yikes. So yeah, what was your reading month like? Did you have a good reading month? What was your favorite book? Have you read any of the books I talked about? What did you feel about them? Let me know in the comments. And please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe for more videos like this. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!